As you may have heard, President Trump has threatened that the United States will withhold our contribution to the World Health Organization. What is the World Health Organization? It is an international organization, part of the UN, which, as its name suggests, deals with issues of international health. Trump's argument that the World Health Organization has become too close to China, even though the United States gives it the most funding, that the World Health Organization repeated China's lies as they attempted to cover up the COVID-19 epidemic, and that the World Health Organization opposed and opposes travel bans. All three accusations are accurate, but let's go a little deeper. The U.S. is WHO's largest contributor, both in terms of assessed contributions and voluntary contributions, and another one of the largest funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is of course based in the United States. The current head of WHO, Ethiopian microbiologist Tedros Adhanom, was strongly supported by China and could be said to owe his position to Chinese support. And under Tedros' leadership, the WHO has tended to follow China's line. Maybe the most notable example of this is that the WHO has not allowed Taiwan to join. This is particularly unfortunate because Taiwan seems to have done a fairly good job of combating coronavirus, and the WHO would be the logical body to help spread that information to other countries. While it's true that in early January, the WHO praised China's handling of COVID-19, that would also describe the Trump administration's posture during the same period. I think it's fair to criticize China for covering up the epidemic and, to a lesser extent, the WHO for their failure to challenge China's version of the facts. Recent reporting has suggested that possibly the cover-up was all on the local level and that the national Chinese government opposed any cover-up. Since it's impossible to know the truth of that, let's just assume for the moment that the original narrative is accurate. In any case, it's difficult to see how either of these contributed to the United States' late reaction to the crisis. After all, the U.S. had plenty of early warning. U.S. intelligence agencies had better information on what was going on in Wuhan province of China than did the World Health Organization. As early as the end of November, the intelligence agencies briefed multiple parties in the executive branch. One of the things security agencies reported to the executive branch is that satellite photos showed that the Chinese had built 2 new hospitals in the Wuhan province in 10 days. The U.S. took no action at all for more than 2 months. On January 24th, the U.S. Senate Committees on Health and on Foreign Relations had a confidential briefing on COVID-19. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know it was dire enough that 5 senators used the information to divest themselves of millions of dollars of stock and buy stock in remote computing companies. It was another 7 weeks before the United States shut down non-essential activities. The World Health Organization began taking the crisis seriously a significant amount of time before the U.S. government did.
I'm not worried at all. I'm not worried at all. I don't worry. All the way long. I don't worry. All the way long. I'm not
On
worried
March
at all.
16th, the Trump administration finally shut down non-essential work in the United States. The point is not to suggest that the United States has been uniquely a failure in its response to COVID-19. The U.S. response has been disappointing, but unfortunately, that is true of a number of countries. But as problematic as the actions of China and of Tedros and the World Health Organization were, it's hard to see that they impacted the United States response. Trump's third stated reason for defunding WHO is accurate. The WHO does oppose travel bans, and while epidemiologists are divided, the majority do think that travel bans can be useful as a temporary measure to buy extra time for a country to prepare for a pandemic. Nothing in the WHO's opposition prevented the United States from instituting a travel ban earlier or from adopting a more comprehensive travel ban than the partial one which President Trump did. Unfortunately, the U.S. government seems to have assumed that a partial travel ban on China would be sufficient and took no other action to prepare for a pandemic. Do the theories we've studied have anything that they can tell us about this conflict? You'll remember that realists think that nation states are the only significant actors. International organizations like the World Health Organization only have power to the extent that they are backed up by a particular nation state. International organizations like WHO never have enough independence of a particular nation state to operate truly autonomously. Realists don't see organizations like WHO as being particularly significant players in international affairs, but neither would they have any problem with the United States using its financial leverage to try to make WHO act more in accordance with U.S. interests. Radical analysts believe international organizations can become powerful, independent, significant actors in world politics, but wealthy capitalist countries ensure that UN organizations do not become independent enough to go against the interests of first world states. Although how exactly China should be classified is a fascinating and confusing topic, Tedros and the WHO have refrained from being critical of both the Chinese and the American responses, which presumably is how each of these powerful countries would want it. Our pandemic response isn't the only thing the United States would want beyond criticism by the WHO. Arguably, the entire trading structure of the post-World War II world has been set up for the benefit of the United States and other first world capitalist countries. Let's dig a little deeper. Radical theorists' objection isn't to all international trade per se. It's that the rules the wealthy capitalist countries impose on free trade are designed to benefit those wealthy countries. This criticism is shared by many or most of the less affluent countries in the world. Most of the tenets of neoliberalism are objectionable to both radical analysts and to much of the developing world. But let's focus on just one of these for a moment. We would not want to have the copyright regime, which we are attempting to spread around the world, criticized, even though this copyright regime makes it considerably more expensive for third world nations to get medication. For many of the most important and lucrative products of the 21st century, the physical cost of production is relatively insignificant. The rights to such intellectual property is perhaps the most important resource of the coming decades. Bill Gates made his fortune by developing a monopoly on the intellectual property rights, the copyright to the Windows operating system, and using that leverage to control the computer market. We don't have to believe that Gates is an evil person with some type of secret agenda to understand that his own formative experiences have given him a certain perspective on the world, and to see it as very strange that he, as an individual, and other billionaires have so much influence on the world system. This same system of international trade is, for liberals, the hope for peace and international prosperity. For liberal internationalists, of course, international organizations like the WHO take on a tremendous importance. Liberal internationalists never claimed that every single international organization has autonomy and plays a positive role in the world, but they do assert the possibility. Liberals sometimes talk about what they call soft power, the ability to get your way in international politics, not by direct threats or force, but by leading by example, by being a respected country, by diplomacy. From a soft power perspective, withdrawing funds from the WHO in the middle of a pandemic would be a disastrous move. Realists believe it doesn't make a difference whether countries are unhappy with the way the United States treats WHO. What will influence the foreign policies of any country is a simple cost-benefit analysis based on how powerful other countries are, but liberal internationalists disagree. Doing something that is bound to be unpopular around the world and that will seem as though the United States is not a cooperative player in the world community will hurt American prestige. I don't consider myself a liberal internationalist, but I have to say that this is my own view. I find defunding WHO in the middle of a pandemic to be very disturbing on moral grounds and on practical grounds.